Welcome to Mystery at 221B, where Sherlock Holmes' secrets come to life.
Chapter 9. The Trap. The evening at Ashby Hall was cloaked in a tension, so thick it seemed to seep into the very stones of the ancient estate. The wind, relentless in its mournful howling, battered the windows, while the fire in the drawing-room cast flickering shadows that danced across the faces of the assembled household. Captain Hastings, seated near Sherlock Holmes, felt his pulse quicken, sensing that the detective was poised to spring a trap that would unravel the tangled web of lies surrounding Edward Greystone's disappearance and Lord Richard's death. Sherlock himself sat with an air of serene confidence, his hands folded neatly, his grey eyes gleaming with the quiet intensity of a chess master contemplating the final move. The household had gathered at Sherlock's request, their faces a study in apprehension. Lady Eleanor sat rigidly, her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes fixed on some distant point. Clara, still shaken from her earlier outburst, clung to Charles Benton's arm, her defiance replaced by a fragile vulnerability. Dr. Langley adjusted his spectacles with nervous precision, while Mrs. Whitmore stood by the door, her stern demeanor betraying a flicker of unease. The Rudds, Thomas and Martha, sat stiffly, their weathered faces unreadable, and Lily Carter, hovering near the tea tray, seemed on the verge of flight. Inspector Grayson, invited to observe, leaned against the mantelpiece, his skepticism palpable but tempered by curiosity. Sherlock rose, his movements deliberate, his voice soft but commanding. "Mes amis," he began, "we have reached a critical juncture in this affair. The disappearance of Mr. Edward, the death of Lord Richard, the missing journal, these are not isolated incidents, but threads in a single tapestry of deceit. Tonight, I propose to pull at these threads and reveal the pattern beneath. But to do so, I require your cooperation and your honesty." A murmur rippled through the room, quickly silenced by Sherlock's raised hand. "Let us begin with a simple exercise," he continued, producing the silver cigarette case from Edward's room. "This case, found in Mr. Edward's room, bears a trace of lipstick, a detail Mademoiselle Clara has claimed as her own. But there is more to it than a mere family quarrel. The cigarette inside, crushed yet unsmoked, suggests a moment of agitation. I ask you now, who was with Mr. Edward in his room last night, between 7 and 9:30? The question hung in the air, met with uneasy silence. Clara's eyes widened, but she said nothing. Charles Benton shifted uncomfortably, his hand tightening on Clara's. Lily Carter's hands trembled, nearly upsetting a teacup, while Mrs. Whitmore's lips tightened into a thin line. The room. A small smear, too little for a mortal wound, yet too deliberate to be accidental. It was placed there, I believe, to suggest violence where none occurred. And then there is the scratch on Lord Richard's desk, made with a sharp instrument, not by chance. These are not clues, mes amis, but distractions, carefully crafted to lead us astray. Inspector Grayson snorted, his patience wearing thin. "Monsieur Sherlock, you're making this more complicated than it needs to be. The lad ran off, likely with the journal, and the blood's just a red herring. I say we search the grounds again and drag that maid in for questioning." Sherlock's smile was almost pitying. "Inspector, your zeal is commendable, but your conclusions are premature. Allow me to propose a different theory, one that accounts for all the facts." He turned to the household, his voice now a velvet whip. "Someone in this room knows where Mr. Edward is and where the journal is hidden. I have arranged a small test to uncover this truth. Captain Hastings, if you please." Hastings, though puzzled, followed Sherlock's early instructions and stepped to the door, opening it to reveal a small table in the hall. On it lay a single object, a leather-bound book, its cover worn but unmistakably the Greystone family journal. A collective gasp filled the room, and Lady Eleanor rose, her face pale. "The journal! Where did you find it?" Sherlock's eyes gleamed. "I did not find it, madame. I had it placed there. A replica crafted this afternoon by a local bookbinder. The real journal remains missing, but this decoy serves a purpose. Observe your reactions, mes amis. One of you betrayed more than surprise." The room erupted in chaos. Clara cried out, clutching Charles's arm. Dr. Langley's spectacles slipped from his nose, and he fumbled to retrieve them. Mrs. Whitmore's face hardened, her hands clenching into fists. The Rudds remained still. But Martha's eyes darted toward the door. Lily Carter let out a small whimper, and Inspector Grayson, red-faced, demanded, "What's the meaning of this, Sherlock?" "The meaning," Sherlock said, his voice cutting through the din, "is that the guilty party has revealed themselves. When I mentioned the journal, one of you looked not at the table, but at another, a glance of fear, of complicity. I will not name you yet, but know that Sherlock Holmes sees all." The tension in the room was electric, each member of the household frozen, as though awaiting judgment. Sherlock continued, his tone now almost conversational. "The journal is the key to this mystery, but it is not the only one. There is also the matter of the letter Mrs. Whitmore saw on Lord Richard's desk, addressed to Edward. I believe it contained a warning that cost Lord Richard his life and set in motion the events that led to Edward's disappearance." Lady Eleanor's voice. Sherlock's gaze was unrelenting. "About a secret so dangerous that someone in this house was willing to kill to keep it hidden. Tonight, I ask you to search your hearts. If you know anything at all, come to me before it is too late." As the household dispersed, their faces a mixture of fear and suspicion, Hastings drew Sherlock aside. "That was a bold move, Sherlock, with the fake journal. But did it work? Did you see who betrayed themselves?" Sherlock's smile was enigmatic. "Oh, indeed, mon ami. The trap was not the journal itself, but the reactions it provoked. One pair of eyes told me more than words ever could. Tomorrow, we shall tighten the net further." As they retired to their rooms, the wind howling outside, Hastings felt a surge of anticipation. Sherlock's trap had stirred the hornet's nest, and the truth was closer than ever. But the shadows of Ashby Hall still held their secrets, and the detective's final move was yet to come. Chapter 10. The Reveal. The drawing-room of Ashby Hall was suffused with an oppressive silence as the household gathered once more. The flickering firelight casting long shadows that seemed to writhe with the weight of unspoken truths. Captain Hastings, seated near Sherlock Holmes, felt his heart pound with anticipation. The detective's trap the previous evening, with the replica journal, had stirred a tempest of emotions, and now, as the clock struck 8, the stage was set for the final act. Sherlock sat with his characteristic calm, his hands folded neatly, his grey eyes gleaming with the quiet certainty of a man who had unravelled the knot of a complex mystery. The household was a study in tension. Lady Eleanor, her face pale but composed, sat at the head of the room, her hands clasped tightly. Clara, her eyes red from sleeplessness, clung to Charles Benton, whose earnest demeanour was strained by the weight of suspicion. Dr. Langley fidgeted with his spectacles, his scholarly air fraying at the edges. Mrs. Whitmore stood by the door, her stern face set in a mask of defiance, while Lily Carter, pale and trembling, hovered near the tea-tray. The Rudds, Thomas and Martha, sat stiffly, their weathered faces betraying a flicker of unease. Inspector Grayson, his skepticism tempered by curiosity, leaned against the mantelpiece, his eyes fixed on Sherlock. Sherlock rose, his movements deliberate, his voice soft but commanding. "Mes amis," he began, "we have come to the heart of this mystery. The death of Lord Richard Greystone, the disappearance of Mr. Edward, and the missing journal. These are not separate crimes, but a single, intricate tapestry, woven by a mind both cunning and desperate. Tonight, I shall reveal the signs, subtle but unmistakable, that suggested otherwise. Dr. Langley, you noted a faint smell of almonds in the study, a detail you dismissed. But almonds, mes amis, are the hallmark of cyanide, a poison, swift and deadly. Lord Richard was murdered, poisoned by someone who knew his habits and had access to his study." Lady Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Murdered? But who?" Sherlock's gaze was unrelenting. "Patience, madam. The journal, kept in a locked cabinet, was open on the desk when Lord Richard was found. Yet the cabinet showed no signs of tampering. Only two keys existed, one held by Lord Richard, the other by his son, Edward. This suggests that the murderer was either Lord Richard himself, opening the cabinet before his death, or someone with access to Edward's key. But why was the journal taken?" He paused, his eyes sweeping the room. The journal, we have learned, contained secrets, debts, scandals, perhaps even a confession. Mrs. Whitmore saw a letter on the desk, addressed to Edward, which vanished the next day. I believe this letter contained a warning, a final message from Lord Richard to his son about a danger within this house. Clara's voice trembled as she spoke. "Edward, did he take the journal? Is that why he's gone?" Sherlock's smile was enigmatic. "A natural assumption, mademoiselle, but incorrect. Edward did not take the journal. He was, however, deeply involved. Let us turn to his disappearance. The blood in his room, the open window, the faint mark in the garden. These were staged to suggest flight or foul play. But the blood was too little for a mortal wound, and the window showed no signs of forced entry. Edward did not flee, nor was he taken. He is still within these walls." A collective gasp filled the room, and Inspector Grayson stepped forward, his face red. "Still here? That's preposterous, Sherlock. We've searched every inch of this house." Sherlock's tone was calm, but cutting. "Not every inch, Inspector. There is a place you have not looked, a place known only to a few. But first, let us consider the motive. The journal contained proof of a scandal that threatened to ruin the Greystone family. A financial scheme, perhaps, or a betrayal. Someone in this room was willing to kill to keep it hidden." He turned to Dr. Langley, whose face had gone pale. "Doctor, you knew of Lord Richard's debts, yet you concealed his history of heart trouble until pressed. Why? Because you feared it would draw attention to the poison. You were in the study that night, and you had the means, a physician with access to chemicals." Langley sputtered, his spectacles slipping. I would never. I was Richard's friend." "Indeed," Sherlock said, his voice soft. "But friendship can mask ambition. Your loyalty to this family is unquestioned, but loyalty can blind one to the truth." Mrs. Whitmore's eyes flashed. "I've done nothing but serve this house!" Sherlock's gaze shifted to Lily Carter, who shrank under his scrutiny. "Mademoiselle Carter, your fear has been evident from the start. You overheard voices in Edward's room, yet you withheld the identity of the speaker. Why? Because you recognized the voice and it terrified you." Lily's hands trembled, but she said nothing. Sherlock continued, his voice now a velvet whip. "And then there is Monsieur Benton, the outsider soon to be family. You were not here the night of Lord Richard's death, but you were close to Edward, close enough to know his fears. Did he confide in you about the journal?" Charles' face flushed. "I told you, I knew nothing about it." Sherlock's eyes gleamed. "And yet, when I revealed the replica journal last night, one of you betrayed yourself, not with surprise, but with fear. That person was you, Mademoiselle Clara." Clara gasped, her hands flying to her face. "Me? That's absurd! I love my brother!" "Indeed," Sherlock said, his tone gentle but firm. "But love can lead to desperate acts. You admitted to arguing with Edward about the journal, to being in his room. You knew he was in danger and you sought to protect him, not by hiding him, but by staging his disappearance. The blood was animal blood, taken from the kitchen, smeared to suggest foul play. The window was opened to imply flight. But Edward is hidden in the priest's hole, a secret compartment in the library known only to the family." Lady Eleanor's voice was a whisper. "The priest's hole? But how?" Sherlock raised a hand. "Edward is alive, madame, and he has the journal. He hid to protect himself, believing the murderer of his father would come for him next. But he could not stay silent forever. Clara, you helped him stage this ruse, did you not?" Clara sobbed, nodding. "I had to. He said the journal proved father was murdered, that someone in the house was after him. I didn't know who to trust." Sherlock turned to the Rudds, his voice now cold. "And you, Monsieur Rudd, you knew of the priest's hole. You overheard Edward and Clara planning, and you saw an opportunity. You poisoned Lord Richard using cyanide from the estate's gardening supplies to silence his warnings about the debts you had entangled him in. A scheme to siphon funds from the estate. You took the journal, but Edward retrieved it before you could destroy it." Thomas Rudd's face contorted, and he lunged forward, only to be restrained by Grayson. "Lies!" he roared. "You've no proof!" Sherlock's smile was serene. "The proof is in the journal, which Edward will produce when—" The room erupted in gasps and murmurs, the air thick with shock. Thomas Rudd's face drained of color, his defiance crumbling. "You can't prove that!" he shouted, but his voice lacked conviction. Sherlock's expression remained calm. "The police will find ample evidence, Monsieur Rudd, once they search your cottage. The cyanide, the journal, your debts, all will come to light." Inspector Grayson, now fully alert, signaled to his constable. "Take him into custody," he ordered, his earlier skepticism replaced by grim determination. As Rudd was led away, Clara collapsed into Charles's arms, sobbing. Lady Eleanor, tears streaming down her face, approached Sherlock. "Edward, is he truly safe?" "He is, madam," Sherlock said gently. "Captain Hastings will fetch him now." Hastings, guided by Sherlock's earlier instructions, hurried to the library, where a hidden panel in the bookshelves revealed a narrow passage. There, pale and disheveled, sat Edward Greystone, clutching the leather-bound journal. His eyes were wide with relief as Hastings helped him out. The household gathered around Edward, their relief palpable, though tempered by the weight of Rudd's betrayal. Sherlock, standing apart, watched the scene with quiet satisfaction. As the family reunited, Hastings drew close to his friend. "How did you know, Sherlock? The priest's hole, the cyanide, everything?" Sherlock's eyes twinkled. "The little grey cells, mon ami. They see what others overlook. The inconsistencies, the motives, the fear in a glance. The journal was the key, and Rudd's desperation to conceal it was his undoing." The firelight flickered, casting a warm glow over the room. But the shadows of Ashby Hall's secrets had finally been dispelled. Sherlock Holmes had woven the threads of the mystery into a tapestry of truth, and the cursed journal's hold over the Greystone family was broken at last. Chapter 11. The Reflection. The storm that had battered Ashby Hall for days had finally broken, leaving behind a crisp autumn morning that bathed the estate in a soft golden light. The oppressive weight that had hung over the house seemed to lift, replaced by a tentative sense of relief, though the scars of betrayal and loss lingered in the air. Captain Hastings, standing by the library window, gazed out at the manicured lawns, his mind still reeling from the dramatic revelations of the previous night. Sherlock Holmes's unmasking of Thomas Rudd as the murderer of Lord Richard and the orchestrator of Edward's staged disappearance had been a triumph of logic, yet it left Hastings with a familiar sense of awe at his friend's brilliance. The household had gathered in the drawing-room once more, but the atmosphere was markedly different. Edward Greystone, pale but resolute, sat beside his mother, Lady
Hand, her relief at her brother's safety, tempered by the shock of Rudd's betrayal. Dr. Langley, Mrs. Whitmore, and Martha Rudd, now a widow in all but name, sat in subdued silence, their faces reflecting a mixture of guilt, sorrow, and gratitude. Inspector Grayson, though visibly chastened by Sherlock's superior deduction, had taken charge of Thomas Rudd's arrest with renewed vigor, promising a thorough investigation into the groundskeeper's financial dealings. Sherlock Holmes, seated in his usual high-backed chair, appeared as composed as ever, his neat appearance and serene demeanor a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil around him. Yet Hastings knew that beneath this calm exterior, Sherlock's mind was still at work, reflecting on the case and its deeper implications. As the household settled, Lady Eleanor rose, her voice steady but laden with emotion. "Monsieur Sherlock," she said, "words cannot express our gratitude. You have saved my son and brought justice to my husband's memory. But I must ask, how did you see through the web of lies that entangled us?" Sherlock's lips curved into a faint, enigmatic smile. "Madam, it is the task of Sherlock Holmes to bring order to chaos, to see the truth where others see only shadows. Allow me to explain, not merely for your sake, but to clarify the method by which the little gray cells achieve their results." He leaned forward, his hands steepled before him, his voice taking on the measured cadence of a lecturer. The key to this mystery was the journal, not merely its contents, but its significance to each of you. Lord Richard's death was no accident, as the faint smell of almonds noted by Dr. Langley suggested cyanide. The journal, open on his desk, was a clue to his final thoughts, a warning to his son, Edward, about a danger within the house. The letter Mrs. Whitmore saw, addressed to Edward, confirmed this. But the journal's disappearance pointed to a deeper motive. He turned to Edward, whose grip on the journal tightened. "Monsieur Edward, you suspected your father's death was murder, and you took the journal to protect it, fearing its secrets would endanger you next. You hid in the priest's hole, with Clara's help, staging your disappearance to draw out the killer. The blood, animal blood from the kitchen, was a clever touch, but it betrayed your sister's involvement." Clara flushed, but Sherlock's tone remained gentle. "Mademoiselle Clara, your love for your brother drove you to this deception, but it also placed you in danger. The lipstick on the cigarette was a small mistake, but it confirmed your presence in Edward's room." Sherlock's gaze shifted to the others. Each of you held a piece of the truth, but fear and loyalty kept you silent. Dr. Langley, you concealed Lord Richard's heart condition, fearing it would obscure the poison.
"Mr. Carter, your fear of Thomas Rudd kept you from naming the voice you heard in Edward's room. And Madam Rudd, you suspected your husband's guilt, but could not bring yourself to speak." Martha Rudd's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded silently. Sherlock continued, his voice now a quiet force. "Thomas Rudd was a man driven by greed and desperation. He had entangled Lord Richard in a scheme to siphon funds from the estate, using his position as groundskeeper to manipulate accounts. When Lord Richard discovered this and threatened to expose him, Rudd acted. He used cyanide, easily obtained from gardening supplies, to silence his master. The scratch on the desk marked where he hid the vial, a detail he overlooked in his haste. Hastings, listening intently, marveled at the clarity of Sherlock's reasoning. "But the replica journal, Sherlock," he said, unable to contain his curiosity. "How did you know it would provoke Rudd?" Sherlock's eyes twinkled. "A simple test, mon ami. The guilty mind is always watchful, and Rudd's glance, directed not at the journal, but at Edward's hiding place, betrayed his fear that the truth was close. It was the final confirmation I needed." Lady Eleanor's voice was soft but resolute. "And the journal, what does it contain?" Edward opened the book, his hands trembling slightly. "It's a record of father's dealings, but also a confession. He knew the estate was failing and had borrowed heavily, some from unsavory sources. Rudd was involved, skimming money for years. Father was going to confront him, but—" His voice broke, and he handed the journal to Sherlock. Sherlock leafed through it briefly, then closed it with a snap. "The journal is evidence, madam, and will be turned over to the authorities. It clears your husband's name and condemns his killer." As the household absorbed this, Sherlock rose, brushing an imaginary speck from his sleeve. "My work here is done, mes amis. The truth has been restored, and order prevails. I leave you to rebuild what has been broken." He turned to Hastings, his voice low. "Come, mon ami. The train to London awaits, and there are other puzzles to solve." As they prepared to depart, Hastings lingered in the hall, watching the Greystone family embrace. The cursed journal, once a symbol of dread, had become a testament to their resilience. Yet it was Sherlock's philosophy that lingered in his mind, a belief in the power of reason to pierce the darkest shadows. Outside, the air was crisp, the mist gone, and the world seemed brighter. As they boarded the carriage, Hastings ventured one final question. "Sherlock, do you ever tire of these games of deception?" Mystery was solved, the guilty punished, and Sherlock Holmes, with his relentless logic, had once again brought light to the darkness. Chapter 12. The Hidden Truths. The departure from Ashby Hall was marked by a quiet solemnity, as though the estate itself exhaled a long-held breath. The golden light of the autumn morning bathed the grounds, softening the stark lines of the ancient stone and lending a deceptive calm to the scene. Captain Hastings, seated beside Sherlock Holmes in the carriage that bore them toward the village station, felt a mixture of relief and unease. The unmasking of Thomas Rudd as Lord Richard's murderer and the safe return of Edward Greystone had resolved the heart of the mystery. Yet Hastings sensed that Sherlock's mind was not entirely at rest. The detective's grey eyes, though serene, held a glint of unresolved curiosity, as if some final piece of the puzzle lingered just out of reach. The household had bid them farewell with a mixture of gratitude and exhaustion. Lady Eleanor, her composure restored, had clasped Sherlock's hand, her voice thick with emotion as she thanked him for saving her family. Edward, still pale from his ordeal in the priest's hole, had promised to cooperate fully with Inspector Grayson's investigation into Rudd's financial schemes. Clara, clinging to Charles Benton, had managed a tearful smile, while Dr. Langley, Mrs. Whitmore, and Martha Rudd had offered subdued farewells. Their roles in the affair now laid bare. Lily Carter, her fear replaced by a tentative relief, had curtsied awkwardly as they departed. As the carriage rattled along the country lanes, Hastings turned to Sherlock, his curiosity getting the better of him. "You've done it again, Sherlock," he said, his tone warm with admiration. "You've brought order to chaos, as you put it. But I can't help feeling there's something more, some detail you haven't shared." Sherlock's lips curved into a faint, enigmatic smile. "You are perceptive, mon ami. The case is solved, the murderer apprehended, the journal recovered. Yet there are always hidden truths, small shadows that linger even when the light of reason shines brightest. Let us reflect on what we have learned." He leaned back, his hands steepled before him, his voice taking on the measured cadence of a man unraveling a tapestry thread by thread. "The journal, Hastings, was not merely a record of deaths and scandals, but a mirror of the human heart. Lord Richard's entries revealed a man burdened by guilt, not only for the financial ruin he faced, but for a deeper betrayal. The journal hinted at a secret from decades past, a betrayal that involved another member of this household." Hastings' eyes widened. "Another betrayal? You mean Rudd wasn't acting alone?" Sherlock's gaze was steady. Not alone, perhaps, of a youthful indiscretion. A love affair that threatened the Greystone legacy. Lord Richard, in his youth, had loved another, a woman of lower station before his marriage to Lady Eleanor. The affair ended, but it left a wound, one that festered when he learned, years later, that it had produced a child. Hastings gasped. "A child? But who?" Sherlock raised a hand, his tone gentle but firm. "The child's identity is not ours to reveal, Hastings. It is a private matter, one that the Greystone family must confront in their own time. But this secret was known to Thomas Rudd, who used it to manipulate Lord Richard, threatening to expose it unless his debts were forgiven. When Lord Richard refused, resolving instead to confess to Edward in that letter, Rudd acted to silence him." Hastings frowned, piecing it together. "So Rudd's motive wasn't just money, it was fear of exposure." "Precisely," Sherlock said. "The journal held the proof of Rudd's schemes, but also of this older scandal. Its power lay not in its curse, but in its truth. Edward, discovering this, sought to protect his father's memory by hiding the journal, but he underestimated Rudd's desperation. They reached the station, where the train to London awaited, its whistle piercing the morning air. As they boarded, Hastings pressed further. "But what about Clara's role, and Lily's fear? There's more to their stories, isn't there?" Sherlock's smile was serene. "Clara's love for her brother drove her to stage his disappearance, but she also knew of the journal's contents. Her fear was not only for Edward's safety, but for the shame the scandal would bring. As for Lily, her fear stemmed from overhearing Rudd's threats to Edward. She recognized his voice in the room that night, but was too terrified to speak. These are the hidden truths, Hastings, the small human frailties that weave the fabric of every crime." As the train began its journey, the countryside rolling past in a blur of autumn hues, Hastings leaned back, his mind racing. "And the scratch on the desk, the blood, the lipstick, these were all part of Rudd's deception." "Not all," Sherlock corrected. "The scratch was Rudd's mistake, a mark made when he hid the cyanide vial. The blood was Clara's doing, a desperate attempt to protect Edward. The lipstick was a mere accident, a trace of Clara's agitation. Each detail, mon ami, told its own story, and it was my task to listen." Hastings shook his head, marveling at the intricacy of it all. "You make it sound so simple, Sherlock, but it's anything but. How do you see these things when the rest of us are blind?" Sherlock's eyes twinkled. "It is not a matter of seeing, Hastings, but of observing. The little grey cells, they arrange the facts, they find the pattern. And in this case, the pattern was one of greed, fear, and loyalty." Spires of the city emerging through the morning mist, Hastings felt a quiet satisfaction. The mystery of the cursed journal had been solved, its secrets laid bare, but Sherlock's words lingered, a reminder that even in triumph, there were truths too delicate to be fully exposed. The Greystone family would heal, but their wounds would leave scars, hidden beneath the surface of their restored honor. Sherlock, gazing out the window, seemed to sense Hastings's thoughts. "Do not dwell on the shadows, mon ami," he said softly. "The truth has been found, and that is enough. There are other puzzles awaiting us, and the world is full of mysteries for Sherlock Holmes to solve." As the train pulled into the station, Hastings smiled, knowing that wherever there was darkness, Sherlock's relentless logic would bring light. The hidden truths of Ashby Hall were behind them, but the journey of deduction was far from over. Chapter 13. The Echoes of Secrets. The rhythmic clatter of the train bound for London seemed to echo the restless thoughts in Captain Hastings's mind as he sat opposite Sherlock Holmes. The golden hues of the autumn countryside blurred past the window, a stark contrast to the dark secrets that had been unraveled at Ashby Hall. The resolution of the mystery, the exposure of Thomas Rudd as Lord Richard's murderer, the safe return of Edward Greystone, and the recovery of the cursed journal had brought a semblance of peace to the Greystone family. Yet Hastings could not shake the feeling that the echoes of those secrets still reverberated, like ripples on a pond disturbed by a stone. Sherlock, as ever, sat with an air of serene detachment, his hands folded neatly in his lap, his grey eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the train's confines. Yet Hastings knew that beneath this calm exterior, the detective's mind was never truly at rest. The case had been solved, the guilty apprehended, but Sherlock's reflections often extended beyond the mere mechanics of a crime, delving into the deeper currents of human nature. As the train rattled through a tunnel, plunging the carriage into momentary darkness, Hastings broke the silence. "Sherlock, you've done it again, brought light to a tangled affair. But I can't help wondering about the journal's secrets, the ones you said were too private to reveal. Will they haunt the Greystones forever?" Sherlock's lips curved into a faint smile, his voice soft but deliberate. "The journal, mon ami, is a mirror of the past, reflecting truths that are both painful and liberating. The Greystones will carry its weight, but they are stronger than they know. The echoes of secrets, Hastings, do not always destroy. They can also heal, if faced with courage." Hastings frowned, his mind returning to the journal's hinted scandal, a child born over them. Sherlock's gaze sharpened, though his tone remained gentle. "The truth, Hastings, is a delicate thing. I have left it to Edward and Lady Eleanor to decide how to confront that particular secret. The journal provides clues, but it is their prerogative to follow them. My role is to uncover the crime, not to dictate the course of their hearts." The train emerged from the tunnel, sunlight flooding the carriage, and Hastings leaned back, considering Sherlock's words. The detective's restraint, his refusal to pry into matters beyond the scope of the crime, was a hallmark of his character, a balance of relentless logic and unexpected compassion. Yet Hastings could not resist one final question. "And what of Martha Rudd? She lost her husband to his own greed. Did she know more than she let on?" Sherlock's eyes gleamed with quiet amusement. "Madame Rudd is a woman of resilience, but also of loyalty. I suspect she knew of her husband's schemes, if not their full extent. Her silence was born of fear, not complicity. She will face her own reckoning, but it is not for us to judge her." As the train neared London, the spires and smokestacks of the city rising through the morning mist, Hastings's thoughts turned to the other players in the drama. Clara's desperate act to protect her brother, Lily Carter's fear-driven silence, Dr. Langley's concealment of Lord Richard's heart condition. All were threads in the tapestry of Ashby Hall's tragedy. "It's a sad business, Sherlock," he said at last. "So much pain, all for a journal and a handful of secrets?" Sherlock nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It is the nature of secrets, Hastings, to fester in the dark. The journal was not cursed, but it was a catalyst, drawing out the greed, fear, and love that lay beneath the surface. In solving the crime, we have given the Greystones a chance to heal, to face their past with clarity." The train slowed, pulling into the bustling chaos of the London station. As porters scurried about and passengers disembarked, Sherlock rose, adjusting his coat with meticulous care. "Come, mon ami," he said, his voice light. "The city awaits, and with it new mysteries. The little grey cells must never rest for long." Hastings followed, his heart lighter despite the weight of the case. The echoes of Ashby Hall's secrets would linger, but Sherlock's relentless pursuit of truth had brought a measure of justice and clarity. As they stepped onto the platform, the noise of the city enveloping them, Hastings felt a renewed admiration for his friend, a man whose logic could pierce the darkest shadows, yet whose humanity allowed those shadows to find their own resolution. The Greystone family, he knew, would face their future with the journal's truths as both burden and guide. And Sherlock Holmes, ever the guardian of order, would move.
Chapter 14. The Legacy of Ashby Hall. The London air was thick, with the familiar sense of coal smoke and damp cobblestones, as Captain Hastings and Sherlock Holmes stepped from the train onto the bustling platform of the station. The clamor of porters, the whistle of departing trains, and the murmur of hurried travelers enveloped them, a stark contrast to the somber quiet of Ashby Hall. Hastings, his mind still tethered to the events of the past few days, felt a strange mixture of relief and melancholy. The mystery of the cursed journal had been solved, Thomas Rudd's treachery exposed, and Edward Greystone restored to his family, yet the weight of the secrets uncovered lingered like a shadow. Sherlock, as ever, seemed untouched by the emotional undercurrents that stirred his friend. His neat figure cut through the crowd with purposeful grace, his gray eyes scanning the platform with a detached curiosity, as though already anticipating the next challenge. Yet Hastings, walking beside him, could sense a quiet satisfaction in the detective's demeanor, a sign that the case, though resolved, had left its mark even on Sherlock's disciplined mind. As they settled into a hansom cab bound for their lodgings, Hastings broke the silence. "Sherlock, the Greystones are safe now, thanks to you. But I can't help wondering about the legacy of all this. The journal, the scandal, the betrayal. Will they ever truly recover?" Sherlock leaned back, his hands steepled before him, his voice measured and calm. "The legacy of a family, Hastings, is not defined by its secrets, but by how it confronts them. The Greystones have been given a chance to rebuild, to forge a new path from the ashes of the old. The journal, once a source of fear, is now a tool for truth. Edward, I believe, will use it wisely." Hastings frowned, his thoughts returning to the hinted scandal of Lord Richard's past. A child born out of wedlock, a secret that had fueled Rudd's blackmail and driven the tragedy at Ashby Hall. "But that child, Sherlock," he said, his voice low. "You said it was their prerogative to uncover the truth. What if they never do? What if that secret festers again?" Sherlock's eyes gleamed with a faint amusement. "You are sentimental, mon ami, and it is a quality I admire, though I do not share it. The Greystones, Edward, Clara, Lady Eleanor, are not blind to the journal's implications. They will seek the truth in their own time, and it is not for Sherlock Holmes to interfere in matters of the heart. My task was to solve the crime, to bring order to chaos. That I have done." The cab rattled through the streets of London, passing gaslit shops and crowded thoroughfares. Hastings gazed out at the city,
his mind replaying the final moments at Ashby Hall, the tearful reunion of the Greystone family, the quiet grief of Martha Rudd, the subdued gratitude of Dr. Langley and Mrs. Whitmore. Each had played a role in the drama, their
Silences weaving a tapestry that only Sherlock's relentless logic could unravel. "And what of Lily Carter?" Hastings asked, turning back to Sherlock. "She was so frightened, yet she held back the truth about Rudd's voice. Will she find peace?" Sherlock's smile was enigmatic. "Mademoiselle Carter is young, Hastings, and fear is a powerful silencer. But she has courage, too, or she would not have stayed in that house of shadows. With Rudd's arrest, her fear will fade, and she will find her place. The human spirit, mon ami, is remarkably resilient." Hastings nodded, though his thoughts lingered on the broader implications of the case. "It's strange, Sherlock, how a single object, the journal, could cause so much pain. It wasn't cursed, not really, but it carried a power all the same." "Indeed," Sherlock said, his voice soft but resonant. "The power of truth, Hastings, is both a blessing and a burden. The journal held the Greystones' history, their triumphs, their failures, their sins. It was not the object itself, but the fear of its revelations that drove Rudd to murder and Edward to hide. Truth, when hidden, becomes a weapon. When faced, it becomes a shield." The cab pulled to a stop outside their lodgings, the familiar sight of Baker Street a welcome return to normalcy. As they alighted, Sherlock paused, his gaze fixed on the city's skyline, now tinged with the soft glow of evening. "Every case, Hastings, is a lesson in humanity," he said, almost to himself. "We see the greed, the fear, the love that drives men and women to act. And in solving these mysteries, we learn not only who they are, but who we are." Hastings smiled, touched by the rare glimpse into Sherlock's philosophy. "You're a remarkable man, Sherlock," he said. "You see the world through those little grey cells of yours, and somehow you make it clearer for the rest of us." Sherlock's eyes twinkled with amusement. "Flattery, mon ami, is unnecessary. The world is a puzzle, and I am merely its solver. Come, let us have supper, for there are other puzzles awaiting us, and Sherlock Holmes must be ready." As they entered their lodgings, the warmth of the familiar rooms enveloping them, Hastings felt a quiet contentment. The legacy of Ashby Hall would endure in the Greystone family, shaped by the truths they chose to embrace. And for Sherlock Holmes, the relentless pursuit of order would continue, each case a new chapter in his unending quest to illuminate the shadows of the human heart. Chapter 15. The Final Note. The familiar warmth of Baker Street enveloped Captain Hastings as he settled into an armchair by the fire, a glass of brandy in hand. The clamour of London outside seemed a world away from the brooding silence of Ashby Hall, yet the echoes of that mystery lingered in his mind. The been resolved with Sherlock Holmes's characteristic brilliance. Yet, as Hastings glanced at his friend, seated opposite with a pipe in hand, he sensed that the case had left a final impression, a note yet to be sounded in the symphony of their adventure. Sherlock, his neat figure silhouetted against the firelight, puffed thoughtfully on his pipe, his grey eyes fixed on the flickering flames. The room was filled with the familiar clutter of their lodgings, books stacked haphazardly, chemical apparatus on the table, a violin resting in its case. Yet it was a sanctuary of order for Sherlock, a place where the chaos of the world could be tamed by the relentless logic of his mind. Hastings broke the silence, his voice tinged with curiosity. "Sherlock, we've left Ashby Hall behind, but I can't help feeling there's a final piece to this puzzle. You spoke of hidden truths, of the Greystones' future. Do you think they'll find peace?" Sherlock's lips curved into a faint smile, his voice soft but resonant. "Peace, mon ami.
is not a destination but a journey. The Greystones have been given the tools to face their past, the journal, the truth about Lord Richard's death, the knowledge of Rudd's betrayal. Whether they find peace depends on their courage to embrace those truths. But I have faith in their resilience. Hastings sipped his brandy, his thoughts drifting to the faces of the household, Lady Eleanor's stoic dignity, Edward's haunted resolve, Clara's fierce loyalty. And the scandal you hinted at, the child from Lord Richard's past. Will they seek it out, do you think? Sherlock's eyes gleamed with quiet amusement. The human heart, Hastings, is a curious thing. It seeks answers, yet fears them. Edward, I suspect, will read the journal's final pages and make his choice. Whether he seeks the child or lets the secret rest, it is his burden now. My role was to uncover the crime, not to shape their future. Hastings nodded, marveling at Sherlock's ability to draw a line between justice and sentiment. "You're a marvel, Sherlock," he said, his tone warm with admiration. "You see through the fog of lies and motives, yet you leave room for others to find their own way. It's rather human of you." Sherlock's smile widened, a rare flicker of warmth crossing his face. "You flatter me, Hastings, but I am merely a servant of logic. The little grey cells, they see the pattern, the order beneath the chaos. Yet I am not immune to the human drama. It is, after all, the canvas on which every mystery is painted." He set his pipe aside, his gaze drifting to the window, where the lights of London twinkled in the gathering dusk. This case, Hastings, was a study in Lloyd's own truth, and in doing so wove the tapestry I unravelled. Hastings leaned forward, his curiosity undimmed. And the journal itself, what made it so powerful? Was it really cursed, or was it just a book? Sherlock's eyes twinkled. A book, mon ami, is never just a book. The journal was a vessel for the Greystones' history, their triumphs, their failures, their secrets. Its power lay in what it represented, the truth unvarnished and undeniable. To Rudd it was a threat, to Edward a legacy, to Clara a burden. The curse was not in the pages, but in the fear of what they revealed. The fire crackled, casting a warm glow over the room, and Hastings felt a quiet satisfaction settle over him. The mystery of Ashby Hall had been a dark one, but Sherlock's relentless pursuit of truth had brought clarity, if not complete resolution. "You've given them a chance, Sherlock," he said, "a chance to heal, to move forward. That's no small thing." Sherlock inclined his head, his expression serene. "It is enough, Hastings, to bring order where there was chaos, to shine light where there was darkness. That is the work of Sherlock Holmes. And now we rest, for the world is full of mysteries, and tomorrow may bring another." As the evening deepened, the two friends sat in companionable silence, the fire's glow a reminder of the warmth that could follow even the darkest of cases. The cursed journal, once a symbol of dread, had been stripped of its power, its secrets laid bare. The Greystone family would carry its legacy forward, guided by the truths Sherlock had uncovered. And for Hastings, the memory of Ashby Hall would remain a testament to his friend's genius, a final note in a symphony of deduction played with flawless precision. As Sherlock reached for his violin, the first strains of a melancholy tune filling the room, Hastings smiled. The case was closed, the shadows dispelled, and the world for now was in order. But with Sherlock Holmes, the next mystery was never far away. In the shadowed halls of Ashby Hall, a cursed journal holds secrets that kill. Lord Richard Greystone is dead, poisoned, his final warning lost in a vanished letter. His son Edward disappears, leaving only a smear of blood and an open window. Was it murder, betrayal, or the journal's ancient curse? Enter Sherlock Holmes, the master of logic, unraveling a web of lies where every suspect hides a motive. Who poisoned the Lord? Where is Edward? And what truth the journal is worth dying for? Step into a mystery where shadows whisper, and only Holmes' little gray cells can find the light. Chapter 1. The Shadow of the Journal. In the waning days of October, when the mists clung to the hedgerows of the English countryside, and the air carried the sharp bite of autumn, Captain Arthur Hastings found himself aboard a train, rattling toward the village of Ashby de la Moor. The invitation to Ashby Hall, the ancestral seat of the venerable Greystone family, had arrived with an air of urgency that piqued his curiosity. It was not every day that a retired military man, now content with the quiet pleasures of London life, was summoned to a remote estate under such mysterious pretenses. The letter, penned in the elegant hand of Lady Eleanor Greystone, hinted at a matter of grave import, though its details were frustratingly vague. "A shadow hangs over our house," she had written, "and we are in dire need of a mind such as your friend's." Hastings, of course, knew at once that your friend could only mean Sherlock Holmes, the meticulous Belgian detective whose reputation for unraveling the most perplexing mysteries had spread far beyond the salons of London. It was with no small measure of excitement that Hastings had persuaded Sherlock to accompany him to Ashby Hall, though the detective's agreement had come with his characteristic air of detached amusement. "A shadow, Hastings," Sherlock had mused, his eyes glinting with that familiar spark of intellectual curiosity. "Let us hope it is a shadow cast by something tangible, and not merely the product of an overactive imagination." The train deposited them at a small, windswept station, where a dour-faced coachman in the Greystone livery awaited with a carriage. The journey to Ashby Hall took them through lanes bordered by ancient oaks, their gnarled branches forming a canopy that seemed to whisper secrets of the past. The hall itself, when it came into view, was an imposing edifice of grey stone, its towers and battlements softened by centuries of ivy and weathering. Yet there was an air of melancholy about the place, as though the very walls bore witness to some unspoken tragedy. They were ushered into the great hall by a butler whose rigid posture and pallid complexion suggested a man long accustomed to serving under strain. Lady Eleanor Greystone awaited them in the drawing-room, a woman composure that did little to conceal the anxiety in her eyes. She rose to greet them, her movements graceful but deliberate, as though each step were a conscious effort to maintain dignity. "Captain Hastings, Monsieur Sherlock," she said, her voice low and cultured. "I cannot express my gratitude for your coming. We are in the grip of a calamity that threatens to undo us all." Sherlock, ever the picture of fastidious elegance, inclined his head slightly. "Madam, I am intrigued by your letter. A shadow, you say. Pray, elucidate." Lady Eleanor gestured for them to sit, and as the fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the room, she began her tale. The Greystone family, she explained, had for generations been custodians of a peculiar artifact, a leather-bound journal, passed down from father to eldest son, its pages filled with the private musings of each patriarch. The journal was more than a mere record. It was said to be imbued with a strange power, its entries guiding the family through moments of crisis with an almost prophetic clarity. Yet in recent years, it had become a source of dread. 3 months ago, Lady Eleanor continued, her voice trembling slightly, my husband, Lord Richard Greystone, was found dead in his study, the journal open before him. The doctor declared it a heart attack, but I cannot believe it. Richard was in robust health, and the expression on his face... She broke off, pressing a handkerchief to her lips. Sherlock's eyes narrowed, his fingers steepled before him. "And you suspect foul play, madam?" "I do not know what to suspect," she admitted. "But since his death, the journal has vanished, and now my son, Edward, has begun to act strangely, secretive, Withdrawn. I fear the journal's curse has taken hold of him. Hastings, ever sensitive to human emotion, leaned forward. A curse, Lady Eleanor? Surely you don't believe in such things. Her gaze hardened. I believe in what I have seen, Captain. My husband's death was no accident, and the journal's disappearance is no coincidence. Someone in this house knows more than they will admit. Sherlock's expression remained inscrutable, but Hastings could sense the wheels turning in his friend's mind. Who else resides at Ashby Hall? Sherlock asked, his tone deceptively mild. Lady Eleanor listed the household. Edward, her eldest son, a brooding young man of 28, recently returned from London. Clara, her daughter, a spirited girl of 22, engaged to a local squire named Charles Benton. Dr. Mortimer Langley, the family physician, who had been a close friend of Lord Richard. Mrs. Agnes Whitmore, the housekeeper, who had served the Greystones for 30 years, and a young maid, Lily Carter, who had only recently joined the staff. That remarked, his eyes gleaming. And each, no doubt, with their own secrets. Tell me, madame, where was the journal kept? In a locked cabinet in my husband's study, she replied. Only Richard and Edward had keys. And the cabinet was forced open? No, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It was unlocked when we found him. Sherlock rose abruptly, his movements precise and purposeful. I should like to see this study, if I may, and then, perhaps, a conversation with each member of the household. The study was a somber room, its walls lined with bookshelves and dominated by a heavy oak desk. The air was thick with the scent of old leather and pipe smoke, and Hastings felt a chill that had little to do with the autumn draught. Sherlock moved about the room with the grace of a cat, his eyes darting from the desk to the fireplace, from the carpet to the windows. He paused at the cabinet, its lock gleaming in the dim light. No signs of tampering, he murmured, almost to himself. Curious. As they returned to the drawing-room, the household assembled at Lady Eleanor's request. Edward Greystone stood by the window, his handsome face clouded with unease. Clara, vibrant and defiant, sat beside Charles Benton, whose earnest demeanour seemed at odds with the tension in the room. Dr. Langley, a man of middle years with a scholarly air, adjusted his spectacles nervously. Mrs. Whitmore, stern and unyielding, stood by the door, while Lily Carter, pale and trembling, kept her eyes downcast. The Rudds, sturdy and weathered, lingered at the edge of the group, their expressions guarded. Sherlock surveyed them all with a calm, penetrating gaze. "Mes amis," he said, his voice soft but commanding, "a crime has been committed in this house, though its nature remains obscured. I am Sherlock Holmes, and I have come to bring order to this chaos. Let us begin with the truth, for the truth, however carefully concealed, will always reveal itself to those who seek it methodically." Hastings felt a familiar thrill at Sherlock's words, knowing that the detective's little grey cells were already at work, piecing together the puzzle of Ashby Hall. But as the firelight danced across the faces of the assembled company, he could not shake the feeling that the shadow Lady Eleanor had spoken of was not merely a metaphor, but a tangible presence lurking among them. The stage was set, the players gathered, and the game, as Sherlock would say, was afoot. Chapter 2. The Silent Crime. The atmosphere in next with the precision of a metronome.
Yet Hastings knew that beneath this calm exterior, Sherlock's mind was a whirlwind of calculation, sifting through the fragments of Lady Eleanor's tale for the first clue to the mystery. The silence was broken by a sharp cry from the hall, followed by the hurried footsteps of a servant. The door burst open, and Lily Carter, the young maid, stumbled into the room, her face ashen and her hands trembling. "It's Mr. Edward," she gasped. He's gone." "Gone?" Lady Eleanor rose, her composure fraying. "What do you mean, gone?" "I went to his room to bring his evening tea," Lily stammered, "and he wasn't there. The window was open and there was blood on the floor." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Charles Benton sprang to his feet, his face flushed with alarm, while Clara clutched his arm, her eyes wide with fear. Dr. Langley adjusted his spectacles, his expression unreadable, and Mrs. Whitmore's lips tightened into a thin line. The Rudds exchanged a glance, their weathered faces betraying nothing. Sherlock, unmoved by the commotion, raised a hand for silence. "Mademoiselle Carter," he said, his voice as smooth as polished glass. "You will take us to Mr. Edward's room at once. Every detail, however small, is of consequence." The household followed Lily up the grand staircase, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous hall. Edward's room was at the end of a long corridor, its heavy oak door ajar. The chamber itself was spacious, furnished with dark wood and heavy drapes, the air tinged with the faint scent of tobacco and leather. The window, as Lily had said, stood open, its frame rattling in the autumn wind. On the floor near the bed, a small smear of blood glistened in the lamplight, no larger than a shilling but stark against the polished wood. Sherlock knelt beside the stain, his movements deliberate, his eyes narrowing as he examined it. "Fresh," he murmured. "Not more than an hour old." He rose and crossed to the window, inspecting the frame and sill with meticulous care. "No signs of forced entry," he noted. "The latch is intact, and there are no scratches or marks to suggest a struggle." Hastings, standing near the door, felt a chill that was not entirely due to the draught. "Do you think he's been taken, Sherlock? Or worse?" Sherlock's lips curved into a faint, enigmatic smile. "Patience, mon ami. The facts will speak, but we must listen carefully." He turned to the household, who hovered anxiously in the doorway. When was Mr. Edward last seen, and by whom? Clara spoke first, her voice trembling but defiant. "I saw him at dinner, around 7 o'clock. He was quiet, as usual, but he seemed distracted. He left the table early, saying he had letters to write." "9:30. Sherlock nodded. "Then we have a window of 2.5 hours, during which Mr. Edward vanished. Mademoiselle Carter, at what time did you bring the tea?" "About 10 minutes ago," Lily replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I knocked, but there was no answer, so I went in." "And the blood?" Sherlock pressed. "You are certain it was not there earlier?" I don't know, sir," she admitted. "I didn't look at the floor before." Sherlock's gaze swept the room once more, lingering on a small writing desk in the corner. He crossed to it and examined its contents. A few sheets of paper, a pen, an inkwell, and a silver cigarette case engraved with the initials E.G. He opened the case, revealing a single cigarette, its tip slightly crushed. "Curious," he murmured, slipping the case into his pocket. Lady Eleanor, her face pale but composed, stepped forward. "Monsieur Sherlock, what does this mean? Is he alive?" "I cannot yet say, madame," Sherlock replied, his tone gentle but firm. "But I assure you, I will find the truth. For now, I must ask that no one enters this room until I have completed my examination. Captain Hastings, you will assist me." As the household dispersed,
their murmurs of fear and suspicion trailing behind them, Sherlock began a methodical search of the room. He examined the bed, the wardrobe, the rug, even the ashes in the fireplace. His movements precise and unhurried. Hastings, accustomed to Sherlock's methods, watched in silence, knowing better than to interrupt the detective's concentration. At length, Sherlock paused by the writing desk, his attention drawn to a small brass key tucked beneath a blotter. He held it up to the light, his eyes gleaming. The key to the cabinet in Lord Richard's study, perhaps, he mused, or something else entirely. Hastings frowned. But why would Edward leave it here? And the blood? Do you think he's been harmed? Sherlock did not answer immediately. Instead, he moved to the window and leaned out, peering into the darkness. The grounds below were shrouded in mist, the faint outline of a garden path just visible. The window was opened from the inside, he said at last, and there are no footprints in the earth below. If Mr. Edward left this room, he did so of his own accord, or someone went to great lengths to make it appear so. The weight of Sherlock's words settled over Hastings like a fog. The disappearance of Edward Greystone, coming so soon after his father's mysterious death, suggested a deeper malice at work within Ashby Hall. But what was the connection to the missing journal? And why the blood? As they returned to the drawing,
The loss of the family journal. I will speak with each of you in turn, and I urge you to be truthful, for even the smallest omission may obscure the path to the truth. The household exchanged uneasy glances, their faces betraying a mixture of fear, guilt, and suspicion. Clara's eyes darted toward Charles, who squeezed her hand reassuringly. Dr. Langley adjusted his spectacles again, a nervous habit that did not escape Sherlock's notice. Mrs. Whitmore stood rigid, her gaze fixed on some distant point, while Lily Carter shrank into the shadows, her hands clasped tightly together. The Rudds, silent and stoic, seemed almost detached from the proceedings, yet their eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Sherlock turned to Hastings, his voice low. The game is afoot, mon ami, and it is a game of shadows, where every player hides a secret. We must proceed with care, for the truth is buried deep within this house. As the clock struck 10, the wind howled outside, rattling the windows of Ashby Hall. Hastings felt a growing sense of unease, as though the very walls were closing in. The mystery of Edward Greystone's disappearance had only just begun, and already it was clear that the cursed journal held the key to a darkness that threatened to consume them all. Chapter 3. The Arrival of Sherlock Holmes. The wind howled mournfully around Ashby Hall as Captain Hastings stood by the drawing-room fire, its warmth doing little to dispel the chill that had settled in his bones. The sudden disappearance of Edward Greystone, marked by that ominous smear of blood, had cast a pall over the household. The faces of the assembled company, Lady Eleanor, Clara, Charles Benton, Dr. Langley, Mrs. Whitmore, Lily Carter, and the Rudds, were etched with varying shades of dread and suspicion. Yet it was Sherlock Holmes, seated with an almost infuriating calm, who commanded the room's attention. His presence, though unobtrusive, was like a lighthouse in a storm, steady and unyielding amidst the chaos. Sherlock had insisted on examining Edward's room further before conducting interviews, and now, as the clock neared 11, he returned to the drawing-room, his expression as inscrutable as ever. Hastings knew that look well. It was the look of a man who had found a thread in the tapestry of mystery and was already tugging at it with relentless precision. "Mes amis," Sherlock began, his voice soft but carrying an authority that silenced the room. "The disappearance of Mr. Edward is a serious matter, but it is not without its clues. I have made a preliminary examination of his room, and I assure you the truth is within our grasp,"
though reading the secrets etched in their expressions.
Let us begin with the evening of Lord Richard's death, 3 months ago. It is, I believe, the root from which this present calamity grows. Who was present in the house that night? Mrs. Whitmore, the housekeeper, spoke first, her voice steady despite the tension in her posture. "It was much as it is now, sir. Lady Eleanor, Mr. Edward, Miss Clara, and myself were here. Dr. Langley was called later, after we found his lordship. The Rudds were in their cottage on the grounds, and Lily had not yet joined us." Sherlock's gaze shifted to Dr. Langley, who fidgeted with his spectacles. "And you, Doctor? You examined Lord Richard. You concluded it was a heart attack?" "Yes," Langley replied, his tone cautious. "His heart had given out quite suddenly. There were no signs of violence, no marks on the body. The journal was open on his desk, but I thought nothing of it at the time." "And yet," Sherlock said, his voice deceptively mild, "the journal has since vanished. Tell me, Doctor, did you notice anything unusual about the study that night?" Langley hesitated, his brow furrowing. "It was disordered, perhaps. Papers were scattered on the desk, which was unlike Lord Richard. He was a man of meticulous habits." Sherlock's lips twitched, as though suppressing a smile. "Meticulous habits," he repeated softly. "A trait I admire." "And you, Madame Whitmore, you entered the study after Lord Richard was found?" "I did," she said, her voice clipped. "I was fetching his evening brandy when I saw him slumped over the desk. I called for Lady Eleanor at once." "And the cabinet where the journal was kept?" Sherlock pressed. "You saw it was unlocked?" Mrs. Whitmore's eyes flickered, but she nodded. "Yes, sir. The door was slightly ajar." Sherlock turned to Clara, whose defiance seemed tempered by worry. "Mademoiselle Clara, your father's death must have been a great shock. Did you notice anything unusual in the days leading up to it? A change in his demeanor, perhaps?" Clara's eyes darted to her mother before she answered.
"He was anxious. He spoke often of the journal, saying it held answers we didn't understand. I thought he was being fanciful, but now—"
Her voice trailed off, and she clutched Charles Benton's hand. Sherlock's gaze lingered on Charles, whose earnest face betrayed a flicker of discomfort. "Monsieur Benton, you are engaged to Mademoiselle Clara. Were you present at Ashby Hall the night of Lord Richard's death?" "No," Charles said quickly. "I was at my own home, Benton Grange, some 5 miles."
I said, "We don't come to the hall after supper unless called." His wife Martha nodded in agreement, her hands folded tightly in her apron. We heard nothing until the next day. Sherlock's eyes settled on Lily Carter, who shrank under his scrutiny. "Mademoiselle Carter, you are new to this household. When did you arrive?" 2 months ago, sir," she whispered, "after his lordship's death." "And yet," Sherlock said, his voice soft as silk, "you seem most distressed by Mr. Edward's disappearance. Why is that?" Lily's eyes widened, and she stammered, I don't know, sir. It's dreadful, that's all." Sherlock said nothing, but Hastings could see the spark of interest in his friend's eyes. The detective rose, brushing an imaginary speck of dust from his sleeve. "Merci, all of you. I will speak with each of you privately tomorrow. For now, I ask that you remain within the hall. The answers we seek are here, among us." As the household dispersed, their footsteps heavy with unease, Sherlock drew Hastings aside. "What do you make of it, mon ami?" he asked, his tone light but his eyes keen. Hastings frowned. "It's a devilish business, Sherlock. Edward's disappearance, the blood, the missing journal, it all points to something sinister. But who could want to harm both father and son?" Sherlock's smile was enigmatic. "That, Hastings, is the question. But I have observed one thing already. The journal is the key. Its disappearance is no mere theft. It is the linchpin of this mystery. And the blood in Edward's room. It is not what it seems." "Not what it seems?" Hastings echoed, puzzled. "But it was blood, wasn't it?" "Oh, indeed," Sherlock said, his voice low. "But whose? And why only a smear when a struggle would leave more? No, mon ami, this is a carefully staged scene designed to mislead. But Sherlock Holmes is not so easily deceived." They retired to the guest rooms prepared for them, but sleep eluded Hastings. The events of the evening replayed in his mind: the blood, the open window, the missing journal, and the uneasy faces of the household. Sherlock, however, seemed almost invigorated by the mystery, his mind already piecing together the fragments of evidence. As Hastings lay in the darkness, the wind rattling the windows, he could not shake the feeling that Ashby Hall was a house of secrets, each locked door hiding a truth that only Sherlock's relentless logic could uncover. The detective's arrival had set the wheels of justice in motion, but the path ahead was fraught with shadows, and the cursed journal loomed over them all like a spectre. Chapter 4. The Questions Begin. The morning sun struggled to pierce the heavy mist that enveloped Ashby Hall, casting a pallid light through the tall windows of the dining room.
Unease. The disappearance of Edward Greystone, coupled with the lingering shadows of Lord Richard's death, had woven a tapestry of suspicion that seemed to tighten with each passing hour. Sherlock Holmes, however, appeared as composed as ever, his movements precise as he sipped his coffee, his gray eyes scanning the room with the intensity of a hawk. The meal was a somber affair, the clink of cutlery and the murmur of polite conversation barely masking the tension. Lady Eleanor sat at the head of the table, her face a mask of stoic dignity, though her hands trembled slightly as she lifted her teacup. Clara, her eyes red from sleeplessness, picked at her food, while Charles Benton, seated beside her, offered quiet words of comfort. Dr. Langley, Mrs. Whitmore, and the Rudds maintained a guarded silence, their expressions betraying little, but their eyes darting nervously toward Sherlock. Lily Carter, serving the meal, moved with a timid deference, her gaze fixed firmly on the floor. Sherlock, having finished his breakfast with his customary efficiency, rose and addressed the room. "Mes amis," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "The events of last night have set before us a puzzle of considerable complexity. To solve it, I must understand the hearts and minds of those within this house. I will speak with each of you in turn, beginning this morning. We shall convene in the library, a place of quiet and order, conducive to the truth." The household exchanged uneasy glances, but none dared protest. Sherlock's reputation preceded him, and his presence seemed to cast a spell of inevitability over the proceedings. Hastings followed his friend to the library, a grand room lined with towering bookshelves and dominated by a long mahogany table. A fire burned low in the hearth, its warmth doing little to dispel the chill of suspicion that hung in the air. Sherlock settled into a high-backed chair, arranging his notebook and pencil with meticulous care. "We begin with method, Hastings," he said, his tone almost cheerful. "Each person in this house holds a piece of the puzzle, whether they know it or not. It is for Sherlock Holmes to fit these pieces together." The first to be summoned was Lady Eleanor. She entered the library with the grace of a woman accustomed to command,
but her eyes betrayed a flicker of apprehension. Sherlock greeted her with a courteous nod. "Madame, I thank you for your cooperation. Let us speak of your husband's final days. You said he was anxious about the journal. Did he confide in you its contents?" Lady Eleanor's lips tightened. "Richard was a private man, Monsieur Sherlock. He spoke of the journal as a family legacy, a record of our triumphs and failures. But he grew secretive in the weeks before his death, locking himself in his study for hours. Once, I overheard him muttering about a reckoning, but he would not explain." "A reckoning," Sherlock repeated, his eyes gleaming. "The journal was open when he was found. Did you see what page?" "No," she admitted. "I was too distraught. Dr. Langley and Mrs. Whitmore were with me when we found him." Sherlock made a note, his pencil moving with deliberate precision. "And your son, Edward, how did he react to his father's death?" Lady Eleanor hesitated, her fingers twisting the lace of her handkerchief. "Edward was devastated, but distant. He left for London soon after, saying he needed time to grieve. When he returned, he was changed, moody, secretive. I thought it was grief, but now I fear it was something more." Sherlock's gaze was piercing. "Madam, do you believe Edward took the journal?" Her eyes widened, and she shook her head vehemently. "No. Edward revered his father. He would never—" "Merci, madam," Sherlock interrupted gently. "That will be all for now." As Lady Eleanor departed, Hastings leaned forward. "She's hiding something, Sherlock. Did you see how she faltered when you mentioned Edward?" Sherlock's lips curved into a faint smile. "Indeed, mon ami. But it is not always what is said that matters, but what is not said. Let us proceed." Next came Clara Greystone, her spirited demeanor tempered by the weight of the previous night's events. She sat opposite Sherlock, her chin lifted defiantly. "I don't know what you expect me to say, Monsieur Sherlock. Edward's gone, and I'm as frightened as anyone." Sherlock's tone was mild, almost soothing. "Mademoiselle, I seek only the truth. Your brother, Edward, did he speak of the journal before his disappearance?" Clara's eyes flickered, but she answered readily. "He mentioned it once or twice, saying it was father's obsession. He thought it was nonsense, all that talk of a curse. But he was curious too. I caught him in father's study a week ago looking at the cabinet." "Looking at it," Sherlock repeated. "Did he open it?" "I don't know," she said quickly. "I left before he saw me." Sherlock made another note, his expression unreadable. "And your fiancé, Monsieur Benton, how well does he know this family?" Clara bristled. "Charles is a good man. He's been nothing but kind to us. He wasn't even here when father died." "Indeed," Sherlock said, his voice soft. "But kindness, mademoiselle, can sometimes mask other motives. Merci." Clara's departure was followed by Charles Benton, whose earnest demeanor seemed strained under Sherlock's scrutiny. "Monsieur Benton," Sherlock began, "you were not present the night of Lord Richard's death, but you are a frequent visitor to Ashby Hall. Did you ever see the journal?" Charles shook his head. "Never. Clara told me about it, but Lord Richard kept it locked away. I'm not part of the family's inner circle, you see." Sherlock's eyes narrowed. "And yet, you are London?" Charles hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "He was troubled. He spoke little, and when he did it was sharp, almost bitter. I thought he was still grieving." Sherlock dismissed him with a nod, and the interviews continued. Dr. Langley revealed little new, reiterating his belief that Lord Richard's death was natural, though he admitted to noticing a faint smell of almonds in the study, a detail he had dismissed at the time. Mrs. Whitmore was terse, insisting she had seen nothing unusual beyond the unlocked cabinet. The Rudds, questioned together, offered little beyond their claim of ignorance, though Martha's hands trembled as she spoke. Lily Carter, last to be interviewed, was a bundle of nerves, insisting she knew nothing of Edward or the journal,
but admitting she had overheard heated arguments between Edward and his father before the latter's death. As the interviews concluded, Sherlock closed his notebook with a snap. "A most illuminating morning, Hastings," he said, his tone almost cheerful. "Each has told us something, and yet each has withheld something. The journal, the blood, the unlocked cabinet, these are not separate mysteries, but threads in a single web." Hastings frowned. "But what about the blood, Sherlock? If Edward wasn't harmed, why was it there?" Sherlock's smile was enigmatic. "A question for another time, mon ami. For now, I must examine the study again. There is a detail, a small detail, that troubles me." As they made their way to Lord Richard's study, Hastings could not shake the feeling that Sherlock was already several steps ahead, his mind weaving a pattern from the scattered clues. The study, with its heavy desk and locked cabinet, seemed to hold its breath, as though waiting for Sherlock to unlock its secrets. And as the detective began his meticulous examination, Hastings knew that the questions had only begun to unravel the dark heart of Ashby Hall's mystery. Chapter 5. The Red Herrings. The morning's interviews had left a palpable tension in Ashby Hall, as though the very air had thickened with unspoken accusations. Captain Hastings, standing by the window of Lord Richard's study, watched the mist swirl over the grounds, his mind replaying the guarded responses of the household. Sherlock Holmes, meanwhile, moved about the study with his characteristic precision, his gloved hands examining every surface with the care of a watchmaker. The room, with its heavy oak desk, leather-bound books, and the now infamous cabinet, seemed to pulse with secrets, each object a potential key to the mystery of Edward Greystone's disappearance and his father's death. Sherlock paused by the desk, his eyes narrowing as he studied a faint scratch on the polished surface. "Curious," he murmured, tracing the mark with a fingertip. "This was not here when we first examined the room." Hastings joined him, peering at the scratch. A thin, irregular line, no longer than an inch. "Could it be from Edward's struggle?" he ventured. "If he was taken from his room, perhaps he was brought here first." Sherlock's lips twitched into a faint smile. "A possibility, mon ami, but one I doubt. The scratch is too deliberate, too precise. It is a clue, or perhaps a distraction." He straightened, his gaze sweeping the room. "We are being led, Hastings, toward a conclusion that is not our own. The blood in Edward's room, the open window, now this scratch. These are red herrings, designed to obscure the truth." Before Hastings could respond, a sharp knock interrupted them. The door opened to reveal Inspector Grayson, a local policeman whose weathered face and brusque manner suggested a man more accustomed to petty theft than high-stakes mysteries. He was accompanied by a young constable who clutched a notebook with an air of nervous diligence. "Monsieur Sherlock," Grayson said, his tone gruff but respectful, "Lady Eleanor sent for me after young Edward's disappearance. I've had a look at his room, and I've got a theory. Seems to me the lad's run off, maybe in trouble, maybe spooked by something. That blood could be his own, from a cut or a fall. No signs of a struggle, you say?" Sherlock's expression remained impassive, though Hastings detected a flicker of amusement in his friend's eyes. "A theory, Inspector," Sherlock said, his voice smooth, "and one that fits the surface of the facts. But tell me, have you considered the journal? Its disappearance is no mere coincidence." Grayson frowned, clearly unaccustomed to being questioned. "The journal? Lady Eleanor mentioned it, but it's just a family heirloom, isn't it? Probably stolen by a servant or sold off by Edward himself. My money's on the groundskeeper Rudd. He's a rough sort, and I've heard he's been in debt. Had a motive to pinch something valuable." Sherlock's gaze sharpened. "Thomas Rudd, you say? And what evidence supports this accusation? Grayson shrugged. None yet, but he's the type. Always skulking about, and he's got access to every part of the estate. I'll be questioning him closely. Sherlock inclined his head, his tone deceptively mild. An excellent plan, Inspector. But I suggest you also consider the alibis of the household for last night, between 7 and 9:30. The truth, as always, lies in the details. Grayson grunted, clearly skeptical but unwilling to challenge the renowned detective. I'll do that, Monsieur Sherlock. But mark my words, this is a simple case of a young man in over his head. We'll find him hiding in a barn by tomorrow. As the inspector and his constable departed, Hastings turned to Sherlock, his brow furrowed. Do you think he's right, Sherlock?
Never so obliging. Come, let us test his theory. They made their way to the groundskeeper's cottage, a modest stone building nestled at the edge of the estate. Thomas Rudd was outside, splitting wood with a practiced swing, his weathered face set in a scowl. His wife Martha stood in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. Both stiffened at the sight of Sherlock and Hastings. Monsieur Rudd, Sherlock began, his tone courteous but firm. Inspector Grayson believes you may know something of the journal's disappearance. I would hear your account. Rudd's eyes narrowed, his axe still in hand. I've nothing to do with it, he said gruffly. I'm a groundskeeper, not a thief. I was in my cottage last night, same as always, after supper at 6. Martha can vouch for me. Martha nodded, her hands twisting nervously in her apron. He was here, sir. We went to bed early, around 8. Sherlock's gaze lingered on the couple, his eyes catching every flicker of expression. And the night of Lord Richard's death, where were you then? Same place, Rudd said, his tone defiant. We don't meddle in the hall's affairs. Sherlock made a note, his pencil moving with deliberate care. Merci, Monsieur and Madame Rudd. I may have further questions. As they returned to the hall, Hastings could not shake his unease. Grayson's theory about Rudd seems flimsy, he said. But the blood in Edward's room. Surely that points to foul play. Sherlock's eyes gleamed. The blood, Hastings, is the most curious piece of this puzzle. It is not enough to suggest a murder, yet too much to be accidental. It is a message, mon ami, but to whom and why? Sherlock summoned Lily Carter for a second interview. The young maid entered, her face pale and her hands trembling. Mademoiselle, Sherlock said, his voice gentle but probing. You told us you overheard arguments between Edward and his father. What was their nature? Lily's eyes darted to the floor. I didn't hear much, sir. Just raised voices, something about money and the journal. Mr. Edward was angry, saying his father was holding him back. Sherlock leaned forward, his gaze piercing. And last night, mademoiselle, where were you between 7 and 9:30? In the kitchen, helping Mrs. Rudd, she said quickly. I didn't go near Mr. Edward's room until I brought his tea. Sherlock dismissed her with a nod, but his expression suggested he was far from satisfied. The maid is frightened, he murmured to Hastings. But of what? Not merely the disappearance of Edward, I think. As the day wore on, Inspector Grayson's presence became a source of irritation for the household. His heavy-handed questioning focused on Rudd, whom he interrogated at length, and he seemed convinced that Edward had fled to escape some financial or personal scandal. Yet Sherlock, with his methodical calm,
Continued to gather details, noting the alibis of each household member. Lady Eleanor had been in her sitting room, Clara and Charles in the drawing room, Dr. Langley in his guest room, Mrs. Whitmore in the servants' quarters, and the Rudds in their cottage. Each alibi was plausible, yet none was airtight. By evening, the inspector's theory had taken root among the household, with Clara tearfully suggesting that Edward might have run off to London. But Sherlock remained unmoved. The inspector's red herrings are useful, Hastings, he said as they retired to their rooms. They distract the guilty, giving us time to uncover the truth. Tomorrow, we will find the next piece of the puzzle. As Hastings lay in bed, the wind howling outside, he could not shake the feeling that Sherlock was already several steps ahead, his mind cutting through the distractions to the heart of the mystery. The blood, the journal, the scratch on the desk,
These were no mere red herrings to Sherlock Holmes. They were signposts, leading inexorably to the truth. Chapter 6. A Clue in Detail. The second day at Ashby Hall dawned with a grey, oppressive sky, the mist clinging to the estate like a shroud. Captain Hastings, roused early by the distant clatter of servants, found himself haunted by the events of the previous night. The smear of blood in Edward Greystone's room, the missing journal, and the uneasy alibis of the household swirled in his mind, forming a puzzle that seemed to grow more complex with each passing hour. Yet Sherlock Holmes, as Hastings joined him in the library, appeared as unruffled as ever, his neat appearance and calm demeanour a stark contrast to the tension that gripped the house. Sherlock stood by a window, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes fixed on the mist-covered grounds. "A fine morning for deduction, Hastings," he said, his voice carrying a note of quiet satisfaction. "The fog obscures the eye, but it sharpens the mind. Today we shall uncover a detail that will illuminate the path to the truth." Hastings, accustomed to Sherlock's cryptic pronouncements, followed him back to Lord Richard's study, where the detective resumed his meticulous examination. The room, with its heavy desk and locked cabinet, seemed to hold its secrets tightly, but Sherlock moved with the confidence of a man who knew precisely what he sought. He paused by the desk, his attention drawn once more to the faint scratch they had noticed the previous day. Kneeling, he examined it closely, producing a small magnifying glass from his pocket. "This scratch," he murmured, "is not the work of chance. It is too regular, too deliberate. Observe, Hastings, the edges are clean, as though made with a sharp instrument, not a haphazard message, or perhaps a marker. Someone wished us to notice it, or to overlook it." He rose and turned his attention to the cabinet where the journal had been kept. The lock, as Lady Eleanor had said, showed no signs of tampering, yet the door was slightly ajar, as though inviting inspection. Sherlock opened the cabinet, revealing a collection of papers, ledgers, and a small velvet box. He examined each item with care, his fingers moving with the precision of a surgeon. At length, he lifted the velvet box and opened it, revealing a single key, identical to the one found in Edward's room. "Curious," he said softly. "Two keys to the same lock, yet the cabinet was unlocked when Lord Richard was found. Why?" Hastings frowned. "Perhaps Edward used his key to take the journal." "Perhaps," Sherlock said, his tone non-committal. "But if so, why leave the key behind? No, there is more here than meets the eye." Their examination was interrupted by the arrival of Inspector Grayson, who entered the study with a purposeful stride, his constable trailing behind. "Monsieur Sherlock," he said, his voice tinged with impatience, "I've been questioning the staff, and I've got something solid. That maid, Lily Carter, she's been acting shifty. I found out she's got a brother in trouble with the law, a petty thief in London. Reckon she might have helped Edward sneak off, maybe even pinch the journal for him." Sherlock's eyes gleamed with interest. "A fascinating theory, Inspector. And what evidence supports it?" Grayson hesitated, his confidence faltering. "Well, nothing direct, but she's nervous, always looking over her shoulder. And she was in the hall last night, near Edward's room, before she brought his tea." Sherlock nodded, his expression unreadable. "I shall speak with Mademoiselle Carter again. But tell me, Inspector, have you examined the grounds beneath Edward's window?" Grayson blinked, caught off guard. "The grounds? Well, no, there were no footprints, like you said. Seemed pointless." "Pointless," Sherlock repeated softly, his tone carrying a faint edge of reproach. "No detail is pointless, Inspector. Come, Hastings, let us remedy this oversight." They made their way to the garden beneath Edward's window, where the earth was soft from recent rain. Sherlock knelt, his magnifying glass in hand, studying the ground with meticulous care. After a moment, he pointed to a faint indentation, barely visible in the damp soil. "Observe, Hastings," he said, "a single mark, as though something heavy was placed here briefly. Not a footprint, but perhaps a ladder or a rope." Hastings' eyes widened. "A ladder? So someone could have climbed into Edward's room?" "Or out of it," Sherlock corrected. "But the absence of further marks suggests it was removed. A careful plan, mon ami, designed to miss—"
Maid entered, her face pale, and her hands clasped tightly together.
"Mademoiselle," Sherlock began, his voice gentle but probing. "You told us you were in the kitchen last night, yet the inspector places you near Mr. Edward's room earlier. Which is true?" Lily's eyes darted to the floor.
I was in the kitchen, sir, but I did pass by Mr. Edward's door around 8. I was fetching linens from the upstairs closet."
"And did you hear anything?" Sherlock pressed. "A sound, a voice, anything unusual?" She hesitated, her voice barely audible.
"I thought I heard voices, sir. Mr. Edwards and another, low, like they didn't want to be heard, but I couldn't make out the words."
Sherlock's gaze was piercing. "And you did not think to mention this before?"
"I was frightened, sir,"
she whispered.
"I didn't want to cause trouble."
Sherlock dismissed her with a nod, but his eyes followed her as she left. "She is hiding something, Hastings," he murmured. "But it is not what the inspector thinks. Her fear is genuine, but it is not the fear of guilt." As the day progressed, Sherlock continued his inquiries, focusing on the smallest details. He examined the cigarette case found in Edward's room, noting that the crushed cigarette bore a faint trace of lipstick, a detail that had escaped Hastings' notice. "A woman's touch," Sherlock said, his voice thoughtful. "But whose? Clara? Lily? Or someone else entirely?" He also requested a map of the estate, which Lady Eleanor provided, revealing the layout of the house and grounds. Sherlock studied it intently, his finger tracing the paths leading from Edward's window to the cottage and beyond. "The grounds are vast," he said, "but not impenetrable. Someone moved with purpose last night, and they left their mark, however faint." By evening, the household was abuzz with speculation, fueled by Inspector Grayson's insistence that Lily Carter was involved. Yet Sherlock remained unmoved, his mind focused on the clues that others overlooked. As they sat in the library, the fire casting long shadows across the room, Hastings could not help but voice his frustration. "Sherlock, we're drowning in details. The scratch, the key, the lipstick, the mark in the garden. How do they fit together?" Sherlock's smile was serene. "They are like the notes of a symphony, Hastings, each distinct yet part of a greater whole. The scratch on the desk, the blood in the room, the key in the box, these are not random. They are the work of a mind that seeks to deceive, but in doing so reveals itself. Tomorrow, we shall tighten the net." As the clock struck 9, the wind howled outside, rattling the windows of Ashby Hall. Hastings felt a growing sense of anticipation, knowing that Sherlock's relentless logic was closing in on the truth. The red herrings had been cast aside, and a single, telling detail,
ready to guide them to the light.
The third day at Ashby Hall dawned with a biting wind that swept across the estate, rattling the ancient windows and deepening the sense of foreboding that clung to the house. Captain Hastings, seated in the library with a cup of tea gone cold, felt the weight of the mystery pressing upon him. The blood in Edward Greystone's room, the missing journal, the faint scratch on the desk, and the trace of lipstick on the cigarette. All these clues swirled in his mind, yet their meaning remained tantalizingly out of reach. Sherlock Holmes, however, sat opposite him, his posture as impeccable as ever, his grey eyes alight with the quiet intensity of a man who saw patterns where others saw only chaos. The household, shaken by Edward's disappearance and Inspector Grayson's persistent accusations against Lily Carter, moved through the day with a palpable unease. Breakfast had been a tense affair, with Clara barely speaking, Charles Benton hovering protectively at her side, and Lady Eleanor maintaining a brittle facade of composure. Dr. Langley, Mrs. Whitmore, and the Rudds kept to themselves, their guarded glances betraying the secrets they held. Yet it was Sherlock's calm assurance that anchored the proceedings, his methodical approach a beacon in the fog of suspicion. As the morning progressed, Sherlock summoned Clara Greystow into the library for a private interview. She entered with a defiant tilt of her chin, but her eyes were shadowed with worry. "Monsieur Sherlock," she said, her voice sharp, "I hope you're not going to waste my time with more questions about Edward. I've told you all I know." Sherlock's smile was disarming, his tone gentle but unyielding. "Mademoiselle Clara, it is precisely because you know more than you say that I must speak with you again. The cigarette case in your brother's room, there was a trace of lipstick on one cigarette. Is it yours?" Clara's face paled, her defiance faltering. "Lipstick? I don't smoke, Monsieur Sherlock. You must be mistaken." "Sherlock Holmes is never mistaken about such details," he said softly, his eyes piercing. "The shade was a delicate rose, a color I have observed on your lips. If it is not yours, perhaps you know whose it is." Clara's hands clenched in her lap, and for a moment Hastings thought she might bolt from the room. But she drew a shaky breath and met Sherlock's gaze. "It's mine," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "I was in Edward's room a few days ago. We argued about father, about the journal. I was upset and I took one of his cigarettes. I didn't even smoke it, just held it. I must have left a mark." Sherlock leaned forward, his voice low. "And what was the nature of this argument, mademoiselle?" Clara hesitated, her eyes darting to the window. "Edward was obsessed with the journal, just like father. He said it held secrets about our family, debts, scandals, things father had kept hidden. I told him to let it go, that it was tearing us apart. He wouldn't listen." Sherlock made a note, his pencil moving with deliberate care. "And did he mention where the journal might be?" "No," she said quickly, too quickly. "He just said it was dangerous, that someone else wanted it." Sherlock's gaze was unrelenting. "Someone else, mademoiselle? Who?" Clara shook her head, her lips trembling. "I don't know. He wouldn't say. Please, Monsieur Sherlock, you must find him. I'm afraid he's in danger." Sherlock dismissed her with a nod, but his expression suggested he was far from satisfied. As Clara left, Hastings leaned forward. "She's lying, isn't she, Sherlock? About the journal, I mean. She knows more than she's letting on." Sherlock's smile was enigmatic. "Lies, Hastings, are like shadows. They reveal as much as they conceal. Mademoiselle Clara has given us a piece of the truth, but it is wrapped in deception. Let us see what others will reveal." Next, Sherlock summoned Dr. Langley, whose scholarly demeanor seemed strained under the detective's scrutiny. "Doctor," Sherlock began, "you mentioned a faint smell of almonds in Lord Richard's study the night he died. Why did you not consider poisoning?" Langley adjusted his spectacles nervously. "Poison? I suppose it crossed my mind, but there were no other signs. No convulsions, no discoloration, and Lord Richard had a history of heart trouble, though he kept it quiet." Sherlock's eyes narrowed. "And yet, you did not mention this history before. Why?" Langley flushed. "It seemed irrelevant. Lady Eleanor knew, but she didn't want it discussed. It was a private matter." "A private matter that may have cost a man his life," Sherlock said, his tone sharp. "Tell me, Doctor, did you ever see the journal's contents?" Langley shook his head. "Never. Lord Richard was protective of it, but I know he was worried about debts, large ones. He confided in me once, saying the estate was in trouble." Sherlock made another note, his expression unreadable. "Merci, Doctor, that will be all." As Langley departed, Sherlock turned to Hastings. "Debts, scandals,
A journal that holds secrets. These are the threads of our mystery, mon ami. But there is one thread that pulls tighter than the rest. Before Hastings could press him further, Mrs. Whitmore entered, her stern face set in a mask of disapproval. "Monsieur Sherlock," she said, her voice clipped, "I hope you're not suggesting I had anything to do with Mr. Edward's disappearance. I've served this family faithfully for 30 years. Sherlock's tone was courteous but probing. "Madame Whitmore, your loyalty is not in question, but your knowledge—"
"I told you, sir, it was a terrible night. I was in shock. But there was a letter on the desk, half-written. I didn't read it, but it looked like Lord Richard's hand." Sherlock's eyes gleamed. "A letter? And where is it now?" "I don't know," she said, her voice faltering. "It was gone the next day. I assumed Edward took it." Sherlock dismissed her, but his mind was clearly racing. "A letter, Hastings," he murmured. "Another piece of the puzzle. Yet no one mentions it until now. The lies are piling up, but they are beginning to crack." As the day wore on, Sherlock continued his inquiries, each interview revealing new layers of deception. Charles Benton admitted to overhearing Edward argue with someone in the garden a week earlier, though he claimed not to know the other party. The Rudds, questioned again, maintained their ignorance, but Martha's nervous fidgeting suggested she knew more than she let on. Lily Carter, when pressed, admitted to seeing a shadowy figure near Edward's room the night of his disappearance, but she could not, or would not, identify them. By evening, the household was on edge, their secrets bubbling to the surface like water in a boiling pot. Inspector Grayson, still focused on Lily and Thomas Rudd, grew increasingly frustrated with Sherlock's methodical pace, but the detective remained unruffled. As they retired to the library, Sherlock spread the estate map on the table, his finger tracing the path from Edward's window to the grounds. "The lies are many, Hastings," he said, his voice low, "but they point to one truth. The journal is the heart of this mystery, and someone in this house knows where it is. Tomorrow, we shall set a trap to catch our liar." As the wind howled outside, Hastings felt a shiver of anticipation. The lies were indeed surfacing, but the truth remained just out of reach, hidden in the shadows of Ashby Hall. Chapter 8. The Emotional Turning Point. The air in Ashby Hall seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour, as though the weight of secrets pressed against the very walls. Captain Hastings, seated in the library as the afternoon light faded into a gloomy dusk, felt a mounting tension that was almost palpable. The revelations of the morning, Clara's admission about the lipstick, Dr. Langley's mention of debts, Mrs. Whitmore's recollection of a half-written letter, had deepened the mystery, yet the truth remained tantalizingly elusive. Sherlock Holmes, however, sat with his customary composure, his fingers steepled before him, his grey eyes gleaming with the quiet intensity of a man on the verge of a breakthrough. The household had gathered in the drawing-room for tea, a ritual that seemed absurdly formal given the circumstances. Lady Eleanor presided with strained dignity, her hands steady but her eyes her visible distress. Dr. Langley, Mrs. Whitmore, and the Rudds maintained their guarded silence, while Lily Carter moved about the room, serving tea with trembling hands. Inspector Grayson, invited to join them, sat awkwardly, his brusque manner at odds with the refined setting. Sherlock, observing the scene from a corner, spoke little, his gaze darting from one face to the next. Hastings knew that look. It was the look of a predator sizing up its prey, waiting for the moment to strike. And strike he did, as the clock struck 4 with a suddenness that startled the room. "Mes amis," Sherlock said, rising with a grace that commanded attention, "we have danced around the truth long enough. The disappearance of Mr. Edward, the death of Lord Richard, the missing journal, these are not separate events, but parts of a single intricate design, and one of you knows more than you have admitted. I ask now for the truth, for the sake of this house and its future." The room fell silent. The only sound the faint clink of a teacup as Lily set it down. Then, to Hastings' surprise, Clara Greystone burst into tears, her composure shattering like glass. "I can't bear it any longer," she cried, her voice raw with emotion. "It's my fault. Edward, father, all of it. I should have stopped him." Charles Benton reached for her, his face a mask of concern. But Clara pushed him away, her words tumbling out in a rush. "Edward was obsessed with the journal. He said it held proof of something terrible, something father had done years ago. He wouldn't tell me what, but he was afraid, said someone was after it. I begged him to let it go, but he wouldn't listen. And now he's gone, and I—" She broke off, sobbing into her hands. Lady Eleanor rose, her face pale but resolute. "Clara, what are you saying? What did Edward know?" Clara shook her head, her voice choked. "I don't know. He wouldn't tell me everything. But he was in father's study the night he died. I saw him leave, late after everyone else had gone to bed. I thought he was just grieving, but now I think he took the journal." Sherlock's eyes gleamed, but his tone remained gentle. "Mademoiselle Clara, this is a grave admission. You saw your brother in the study the night of Lord Richard's death. Did you see the journal in his possession?" Clara hesitated, her tears slowing. "No, but the cabinet was open. I saw it from the hall. I didn't think anything of it then, but now—" Sherlock nodded, his expression unreadable. "And you kept this from us? Why?" "I was protecting him," Clara cried. "He's my brother. I didn't want to believe he could be involved in whatever this is." The room erupted in murmurs, with Inspector Grayson leaning forward, his eyes narrowed. "So the lad took the journal and ran off, did he?" Cutting through the chatter. "Inspector, your enthusiasm for simple solutions is admirable but premature. Mademoiselle Clara's revelation is significant, but it is not the whole truth. There's more here, hidden in the shadows of fear and loyalty." He turned to Lily Carter, who stood frozen by the tea tray, her face ashen. "Mademoiselle Carter," he said softly, "you have been most silent, yet your fear speaks volumes. You overheard voices in Edward's room last night. Was one of them Mademoiselle Clara's?" Lily's eyes widened, and she shook her head frantically. "No, sir. I swear it wasn't Miss Clara. It was a man's voice, low and angry. I couldn't tell who." Sherlock's gaze was unrelenting. "And yet you did not come forward with this until pressed. Why?" Lily's hands twisted together, her voice barely audible. "I was scared, sir. I thought I'd be blamed." Sherlock dismissed her with a nod, but his eyes followed her as she fled the room. He then turned to Dr. Langley, whose scholarly demeanor seemed to falter under the detective's scrutiny. "Doctor, you mentioned debts troubling Lord Richard. Were these debts significant enough to drive someone to desperate measures?" Langley adjusted his spectacles, his voice unsteady. "They were considerable, yes. The estate was mortgaged heavily, and Lord Richard had borrowed against future income. I advised him to sell some land, but he refused, saying the journal held the key to saving the family." Sherlock's lips curved into a faint smile. "The journal again. It is the thread that binds this mystery. And you, Madam Whitmore," he said, turning to the housekeeper. "You saw a letter on Lord Richard's desk. Was it addressed to anyone?" Mrs. Whitmore's stern facade cracked, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't read it closely, sir, but it looked like it was to Edward. I saw his name at the top." The room fell silent, the weight of these revelations settling over the household like a storm cloud. Hastings, watching the scene unfold, felt a surge of admiration for Sherlock's ability to draw out the truth, piece by piece. Clara's emotional outburst had cracked open the case, revealing new layers of deceit and motive, but it had also deepened the mystery. If Edward had taken the journal, where was he now? And whose was the angry voice in his room? Sherlock rose, his movements deliberate. "Mes amis, we are close to the truth, but it is still obscured by fear and half-truths. Tonight, I shall require your presence in the drawing-room after dinner. We shall see if a little pressure will bring the rest to light." As the household dispersed, their faces a mixture of relief and dread, Hastings drew Sherlock aside. "Clara's confession changes everything, doesn't it? If Edward took the journal, he might still be alive, hiding somewhere. Sherlock's smile was enigmatic. Clara is a step toward the truth, but it is not the truth itself. She has given us a piece of the puzzle, but it is incomplete. The journal, the blood, the letter, these are the keys, and someone in this house holds the lock. As night fell, the wind howled outside, rattling the windows of Ashby Hall. Hastings felt a growing sense of anticipation, knowing that Sherlock was preparing to tighten the net. The emotional turning point had come, and the truth was closer than ever. Yet the shadows of Ashby Hall still held their secrets tightly.